Thinking Fast and Slow Summary. Introduction. The book focuses on how people think and make decisions. It explains two main ways the mind works, one that's quick, automatic and often emotional, and another that's slower, more logical, and takes effort. These two ways shape everything from small daily choices to big life decisions. The fast way helps people react instantly without much thought, like dodging something coming at them. The slow way kicks in for harder tasks like solving a math problem or planning a trip. Both are useful, but they don't always agree, and that can lead to mistakes. The book aims to show how these two systems interact, why people sometimes judge things wrongly, and how understanding this can improve decisions. It's based on years of research, including studies with real people and experiments, not just guesses. The goal is to help readers see their own thinking habits and maybe fix some flaws. The introduction also mentions that the book mixes psychology with everyday examples. It's not just for experts, anyone can follow it. There's a promise to explore why people overestimate what they know, why they trust their gut too much, and how they misjudge risks or chances. It sets up the idea that human thinking isn't perfect, even though people like to think it is. The two systems aren't enemies, but they can trip each other up. This sets the stage for digging into details and evidence later. Chapter 1. The characters of the story. This chapter introduces the two thinking systems more formally. The fast one is called System 1. It's always running, handling simple stuff without people noticing. It's what makes someone smile at a puppy or jump at a loud noise. It uses habits, feelings, and quick impressions to decide things fast. The slow one, System 2, only turns on when needed. It's for tough tasks like figuring out a puzzle or checking a bill. It takes focus and energy, so people don't use it all the time. System 1 is like a worker who handles routine jobs, while System 2 is the boss who steps in for big problems. The chapter gives examples to show how they work. If someone hears 2 plus 2, System 1 instantly says 4. But if it's 17 times 24, System 2 has to grind through it. System 1 is great for speed but sloppy with details. It might assume a stranger looks friendly based on a smile, even if that's wrong. System 2 can catch those errors, but it's lazy. People don't always double-check their quick thoughts, so System 1 often runs the show. The chapter points out that both systems evolved for survival. Fast reactions kept humans alive in the wild, while slow thinking helped with plans like building tools. Today, though, the mix can cause trouble in a complicated world. There's also talk about how the two systems fight sometimes. System 1 might say a cheap item is a great deal, while System 2 might spot its low quality. If System 2 doesn't step in, people go with the fast choice and regret it later. The chapter ends by saying the book will use these ideas to explain bigger thinking errors like why people misjudge odds or stick to bad habits. Chapter 2. Attention and effort. This chapter explains how the mind handles tasks that need focus and energy. The slower thinking system, System 2, is the one that deals with anything hard or complicated. It's not automatic. It takes real effort to use. When someone tries to remember a phone number, solve a tricky question, or stay polite when they're annoyed, System 2 is at work. Effort isn't just mental. It can tire a person out physically too. Studies show that after tough thinking tasks, people's heart rates go up, and they might even feel worn out like after exercise. The chapter says this system has limits. People can't focus on too many hard things at once, and if they try, they mess up. One example is about walking and counting. If someone walks normally, they don't think about it. System 1 handles it fine. But if they have to count backward from 100 by 7s while walking, System 2 takes over, and they slow down or stumble. That's because System 2 can only do so much. The chapter brings up experiments where people had to watch numbers flash on a screen and press a button when certain ones appeared. It's easy at first, but if the numbers come faster or they're distracted, mistakes pile up. This shows attention isn't endless. It runs out when pushed too hard. There's also a point about how people avoid using System 2 if they can. It's lazy by nature. If a question looks tough, like how many animals did Moses take on the ark, System 1 might guess quick and wrong, maybe saying 2 of each without catching that Moses didn't have an ark, Noah did. System 2 could fix that, but people often skip the effort. The chapter says this laziness isn't always bad, it saves energy for when it's really needed. But it means quick thinking can take over even when it shouldn't. Another idea is how effort changes with practice. Something hard, like driving a car, starts with System 2 in full gear. Every turn and signal takes focus. After years, it shifts to System 1, and driving feels easy. The chapter wraps up by saying, System 2 is what makes humans special. It's behind logic, planning, and self-control. But it's not perfect, and its limits shape how people act every day. Chapter 3. The Lazy Controller. This chapter digs into why the slower thinking system, System 2, doesn't always step in when it should. System 2 is supposed to check the quick decisions System 1 makes, like a supervisor watching a worker. But it often slacks off. People don't like using effort unless they have to. So System 2 stays quiet, even when System 1 is heading for a mistake. The chapter says this laziness comes from how the mind saves energy. Thinking hard takes a lot out of a person, so the brain leans on the fast, easy system instead. One example is a simple math problem with a trick. Imagine a bat and a ball cost $1.10 together. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? System 1 jumps in and says 10 cents because it feels right fast. But if System 2 checks, it sees that doesn't work. 10 cents plus $1, and 10 cents is $1.20, not $1.10. The real answer is 5 cents. Studies show most people, even smart ones, stick with the fast wrong answer because System 2 doesn't bother to double check. The chapter also talks about what happens when System 2 is busy. If someone is memorizing a list of numbers while walking, they can't focus on both perfectly. Walking slows down or they forget the numbers. This shows System 2 can't split its attention well. It's why people mess up when they're distracted. There's an experiment with students who had to watch a basketball game and count passes. They got so focused they didn't notice a person in a gorilla suit walk across the screen. The point is, when System 2 locks onto one thing, it misses others. Another idea is how mood and energy affect this. When people are tired, stressed, or low on sugar, System 2 gets even lazier. They're more likely to trust System 1's quick guesses then. But when they're rested and alert, System 2 kicks in better. The chapter mentions self-control too, like resisting a cookie when dieting. That's System 2's job, but it fails if someone's worn out from a long day. The chapter ends by saying System 2 isn't a hero. It could fix a lot of errors, but its laziness lets System 1 run wild too often. Chapter 4, The Associative Machine. This chapter explores how the fast thinking system, System 1, links ideas together without much effort. It's like a machine that connects things in the mind based on past experiences, habits, or feelings. When someone hears a word like banana, their brain might instantly think yellow or fruit without them trying. This happens all the time, and it's how System 1 makes sense of the world quickly. The chapter says these connections aren't random, they come from what people have seen or learned before. One example is how words can set off reactions. If someone reads vomit and then soup, they might feel a flicker of disgust even if they don't want to. That's System 1 tying the ideas together fast. Experiments show this with lists of words flashed on screens. If bread comes before butter, people recognize butter faster than if it followed something unrelated like nurse. The mind primes itself, making related things pop up easier. This helps in daily life, like knowing fork goes with knife, but it can also trick people. The chapter explains that this linking isn't just words, it works with sights, sounds, and feelings too. If someone sees a smiling face, they're more likely to think a stranger is nice, even without proof. System 1 grabs whatever's close in memory and runs with it. There's an example with a test where people had to finish a sentence. After seeing Florida and wrinkle, they picked words like old more often because those ideas got linked in their heads. It's automatic and hard to stop. Another point is how this can mess up judgment. If someone hears about a smart person, System 1 might assume they're also kind or successful, even if there's no evidence. The chapter calls this a halo effect. One good trait spreads to everything else. It's fast and feels right, but it's not always true. System 2 could step in and question it, but it usually doesn't. The chapter ends by saying this associative power is why first impressions stick and why people jump to conclusions so easily. Chapter 5. Cognitive Ease. This chapter looks at how the mind prefers things that feel easy and familiar. System 1 likes when information comes smoothly, when it doesn't have to work hard to understand something. This feeling of ease shapes what people believe and how they decide. If a sentence is simple or a picture is clear, System 1 says it's probably true or good. But if something's confusing or takes effort, it feels less trustworthy. The chapter says this happens because the brain ties ease with safety and comfort from past experience. One example is about reading. Words printed in bold, clear letters get trusted more than blurry ones, even if the message is the same. Experiments show people rate statements like, "the sky is blue," as truer when they're easy to read. It's not logic, it's just System 1 liking what flows. The chapter also mentions repetition. If someone hears a phrase like "dogs are friendly" over and over, it starts feeling true, even if it's not always right. Familiarity breeds trust, and System 1 doesn't care about facts. There's a flip side too. When things get hard, like a tricky math problem or a fuzzy image, System 2 might wake up. But if it doesn't, System 1 just guesses or gives up. The chapter talks about how mood plays in. When people are happy, System 1 leans harder on ease and quick answers. When they're tense, they're more likely to doubt and dig deeper. An experiment showed that people in a good mood fell for simple tricks more, while those feeling off caught them. Another idea is how this affects effort. If a task feels easy, people keep going. If it's tough, they slow down or quit. The chapter gives an example of a test with instructions in tiny grey print. People didn't bother reading it and did worse. Ease isn't just about believing, it's about action too. The chapter wraps up by saying companies and speakers use this. Clear ads, catchy slogans, and simple logos stick because System 1 grabs them fast. People don't always notice, but it steers them anyway. Chapter 6. Norms, Surprises, and Causes. This chapter explains how System 1 makes sense of the world by expecting things to follow patterns. It builds a picture of what's normal based on what people see and do every day. If a car honks in traffic, System 1 doesn't blink. It fits the usual scene. But if a cow walks down a city street, it's a shock because it breaks the norm. The chapter says System 1 is always guessing what's next, and it likes when things match up. When they don't, it flags them as odd, and sometimes System 2 has to figure out why. One point is how fast this happens. If someone hears a loud bang at a fireworks show, System 1 says fireworks and moves on. But the same bang in a quiet library feels wrong, and the mind scrambles to explain it. Experiments show people notice weird stuff quick, like a word in red ink when all the others are black. System 1 is built to spot breaks in the pattern. It's not deep thinking, it's just reacting to what doesn't fit. The chapter also talks about causes. System 1 loves linking things up. If a kid cries right after a shot, the mind says the shot caused it. It's automatic, not a slow debate. This helps people learn, like knowing rain makes the ground wet, but it can fool them too. If two things happen close together, System 1 assumes they're connected, even if they're not. There's an example of a study where people saw a fire, and then a truck arriving. They tied the truck to the fire, even though it was just timing. Another idea is how surprises shape memory. Normal stuff fades, but odd events stick. If someone trips and laughs it off, it's forgotten. If they trip and a lion jumps out, it's a story forever. The chapter says, System 1 uses these norms to keep life simple, but it's not perfect. It misses big picture stuff and jumps on easy answers. The end ties this to how people judge what's real. Things that fit the norm feel truer, even if they're not. Chapter 7, A Machine for Jumping to Conclusions. This chapter focuses on how System 1 rushes to make sense of things, even with little information. It's like a machine that grabs whatever's handy and spits out an answer fast. It doesn't wait for all the facts or check if they fit. It just goes. This speed helps in a pinch, like ducking a thrown ball, but it leads to sloppy thinking too. The chapter says, System 1 doesn't like loose ends. It fills gaps with guesses and acts like they're solid truth. One example is about faces. If someone sees a person with a frown, System 1 might tag them as mean right away. It's not a deep look, just a snap judgment from a single clue. Studies show this with words too. If people read bank and then river, they think of a stream. If it's bank and money, they picture a vault. System 1 picks the meaning that pops up first, based on what's nearby, not the full story. It's quick, but careless. The chapter also brings up something called the halo effect again. If someone seems nice early on, System 1 assumes they're smart and honest too. One good trait paints the whole picture, even if it's wrong. There's a test where people judged a fake person named Alan. With words like kind first, they liked him. Switch it to rude first, and they didn't. The order flipped their view, all from System 1 latching onto the start. Another point is how it ignores missing pieces. If a story says a man ran into a burning house, System 1 might say he's brave. It doesn't ask why he ran in or if he's a firefighter. It just decides. The chapter says this jumping saves time, but skips logic. System 2 could slow down and question, but it usually doesn't. The end notes that people trust these quick takes because they feel right even when they're off. Chapter 8, How Judgments Happen. This chapter looks at how System 1 makes decisions about things like size, distance, or value without much thought. It's not a careful process. It's more like an instant guess based on what's easy to grab. The chapter says System 1 uses shortcuts, pulling from feelings or simple rules, instead of digging into details. This makes judgments fast, but not always right. People don't notice because it feels natural. One example is about intensity. If someone hears a loud sound, System 1 judges it as closer than a soft one. It's the same with light. Bright means near, dim means far. The mind ties strength to distance without measuring anything. Experiments show this with pain too. A short, sharp sting feels worse than a longer, dull ache, even if the total hurt is less. System 1 cares about the peak, not the whole. The chapter also talks about substitution. If a question is hard, like, is this person a good leader? System 1 swaps it for an easier one, like, do I like them? It answers that instead and moves on. There's a study where people rated how happy someone was. Instead of thinking deep, they checked if the person smiled a lot. It's quicker, but it misses the real picture. System 1 doesn't care about accuracy. It wants done. Another idea is how feelings steer this. If someone's in a good mood, they judge things better. Weather, people, even odds. Bad moods flip it the other way. The chapter says System 1 leans on what's in front of it, like recent events or strong impressions. It's why a sunny day can make everything seem fine. The end points out that these snap calls shape big choices, like voting or buying, even though they're shallow. Chapter 9. Answering an easier question. This chapter explains how the mind dodges hard questions by swapping them for simpler ones. System 1 doesn't like struggle, so when faced with something tough, it picks an easier version and answers that instead. People don't always see this switch. They think they've tackled the real problem. The chapter says this happens all the time, especially when information is thin or the brain's too lazy to dig deeper. One example is about happiness. If someone asks, "How happy are you with life?" it's a big, messy question. System 1 doesn't sift through years of ups and downs. Instead, it checks, "Am I happy right now?" or "Did something good happen lately?" and calls that the answer. Studies show people asked about life satisfaction gave answers tied to their mood that day, like if it was sunny or they had a good lunch. It's not the full truth, just what's handy. The chapter calls this substitution. Another case is judging a politician. Instead of weighing their whole record, System 1 might ask, "Do they look strong? Or do I trust their face?" and go with that. There's an experiment where people rated a company's success. They didn't crunch numbers. They leaned on how famous it was, or if they liked its ads. The simpler question took over because it's less work. Another point is how this ties to feelings. If the easy answer feels right, System 1 sticks with it. If someone's asked, "Is this car safe?" they might think, "Does it look cool?" and say yes if it does. The chapter says System 2 could catch these swaps, but it often doesn't bother. The end notes that this trick makes life smoother. People decide fast, but it's why judgments can be shallow or flat out wrong. Chapter 10, The Law of Small Numbers. This chapter talks about how people trust small bits of information too much. System 1 grabs a tiny sample, like a few examples or a short streak, and acts like it's the whole truth. The chapter says this comes from wanting quick, clear answers, even when the data's too small to mean much. People don't see the risk because small numbers feel solid to System 1, even though they can trick. One example is about coin flips. If someone flips a coin 4 times and gets heads each time, System 1 might say the coin's rigged. But with so few flips, weird runs happen by chance. Bigger samples, like hundreds of flips, show heads and tails even out, but System 1 doesn't wait for that. It jumps on the little streak. Studies show people do this with real stuff too, like guessing a school's quality from a handful of test scores instead of years of results. The chapter brings up a made-up town with 2 hospitals. One's big, with lots of babies born daily, and one's small, with fewer. People think the small one's more likely to have days where all babies are boys, but that's backward. Small samples swing wilder. 60% boys in a small hospital is common, while the big one stays closer to 50%. System 1 misses this and trusts the small snapshot anyway. Another idea is how stories beat stats. If someone hears a friend got lucky 3 times in a row, they believe luck's real, more than if they saw a chart of thousands of random tries. The chapter says this faith in small numbers fuels overconfidence. People see a pattern, like a team winning twice, and predict more wins, ignoring how shaky the evidence is. The end points out that experts fall for this too. They lean on tiny clues and miss the bigger odds. Chapter 11, Anchors. This chapter explains how the mind gets stuck on random numbers or ideas that show up first. System 1 latches onto these starting points, called anchors, and uses them to judge everything after. It doesn't matter if the anchor makes sense, it still pulls decisions toward it. The chapter says this happens because System 1 likes quick reference points, even shaky ones, over starting from scratch. One example is about guessing. People were asked if Gandhi lived past 100 years. Then they had to estimate his age at death. Those given a high anchor, like 100, guessed higher, like 90, than those given a low one, like 35, who said 60. The first number shaped their answers, even though it was just a hint. Studies show this with prices too. If a store lists a shirt at $200 before dropping it to $50, $50 feels cheap. Without the high anchor, it might seem pricey. The chapter also shows how anchors sneak in. In an experiment, people spun a wheel that stopped on 10 or 65, then guessed how many African countries are in the United Nations. The wheel's number, random and unrelated, pushed their guesses low or high. System 1 didn't ignore it, it adjusted from there. This works with serious stuff too, like judges setting sentences. A high anchor, like 10 years, leads to tougher penalties than a low one, like 1 year. Another point is that System 2 isn't much help. It could question the anchor, but it usually goes along unless the number's absurd. The chapter says salespeople and negotiators use this, start high, and the final deal seems fair, even if it's not. The end notes that anchors stick because they feel like a base to build on, and people don't shake them off easily. Chapter 12. The Science of Availability. This chapter looks at how easy it is for people to think of something affects what they believe. System 1 judges things based on what comes to mind fast, called availability. If examples pop up quickly, it feels like they're common or true. If they don't, it seems rare or false. The chapter says this shortcut skips real facts and leans on memory or feelings, which can twist the truth. One example is about risks. People were asked if tornadoes or asthma kill more each year. Most pick tornadoes because they're dramatic and easy to picture. News shows wrecked houses. Asthma's quiet, so it's harder to recall, even though it kills way more. System 1 goes with what's vivid, not what's real. Studies show this with words too. If someone lists more words starting with K than with K in the third spot, they think K beginnings are more common. They're not. Third spot Ks win, but listing them feels harder, so availability rules. The chapter also ties this to personal stuff. If someone's asked, "How often do you argue?" they guess based on fights they remember. A big blowout last week makes it seem frequent even if it's rare. Another point is how media pumps this up. Plane crashes get tons of coverage, so people fear flying more than driving, though driving's riskier. System 1 grabs the loudest, closest thing. Another idea is effort. If it's tough to think of examples, like naming 10 good movies, it feels like there aren't many, even if there are. Easy lists, like 10 bad meals, make the topic seem bigger. The chapter says System 2 could check stats, but it usually trusts System 1's quick take. The end notes that availability shapes worries, choices, and even laws, all because the mind leans on what's handy. Chapter 13. Availability, Emotion, and Risk. This chapter builds on how easy it is to recall something and adds how feelings shape it. System 1 doesn't just count what comes to mind, it weighs how strong the emotions are. Things that scare, excite, or upset people stick out more, so they feel bigger than they are. The chapter says this mix of availability and emotion drives how people see risks, often blowing them out of proportion or brushing them off. One example is about disasters. Earthquakes grab attention because they're sudden and terrifying. People can picture the ground shaking. Heart disease kills more but feels less risky because it's slow and quiet. Studies show folks overestimate dramatic deaths like shark attacks over dull ones like diabetes, even though the dull ones are common. System 1 ties fear to frequency, not facts. If something's scary and fresh in memory, it's a big deal. The chapter also looks at personal stakes. If someone knows a friend who crashed a motorcycle, they'll see riding as dangerous, even if stats say it's not so bad. Emotion amps up availability. There's an experiment where people rated risks after reading stories. A tale of a vivid flood made floods seem likely, while a dry stat sheet didn't. System 1 grabs the story, not the numbers. Another point is how this hits groups. If everyone's talking about a disease outbreak, it feels huge, even if cases are few. Media feeds this. Loud headlines make rare stuff loom large. The chapter says System 2 could balance it with data, but emotions often win. The end ties this to choices, like avoiding planes after a crash or buying insurance after a scare. Feelings and fast recall steer more than reason. Chapter 14. Tom W.'s Specialty. This chapter shows how System 1 guesses about people or situations using stereotypes and quick clues. It doesn't dig deep. It picks traits that stand out and builds a story from there. The chapter says this happens because the mind wants fast answers, even if they're sloppy or wrong. People lean on what's typical instead of checking what's likely. One example is a made-up guy, Tom W. He's described as shy, neat, and into details. People had to guess his job from a list, like librarian, farmer, or pilot. Most picked librarian because it fits the shy, bookish image. System 1 matched the traits to a stereotype, not the odds. In reality, there are more farmers than librarians, so Tom's more likely a farmer, but that's ignored. The chapter says this is representativeness, judging by how well something fits a picture, not how common it is. The chapter also tests this with a twist. People got the same description, but were asked what Tom studied in college. They still leaned toward library science over engineering or business. System 1 stuck to the neat, quiet vibe, even though those fields have more students. It's not about numbers, it's about the story feeling right. Another case is a woman named Linda, who's smart and into social causes. People said she's more likely a feminist bank teller than just a bank teller. That's backward. Bank tellers outnumber feminist ones. But the feminist tag fits her better, so System 1 picks it. The point is that System 1 skips logic for fit. It doesn't care about base rates, like how many people actually do a job, just the surface match. The chapter says System 2 could fix this by crunching real probabilities, but it rarely does. The end notes that this habit shapes how people size up strangers, risks, or even predictions, often missing the bigger truth. Chapter 15. Linda, less is more. This chapter digs deeper into how System 1 picks options that feel right, even when they don't make sense. It focuses on a flaw where adding details makes something seem more likely, though it's actually less. The chapter says this happens because System 1 loves a good story over cold odds. People fall for it because the extra bits fit a picture, not because they're true. The big example is Linda again. She's 31, single, smart, and into social justice. People were asked which is more likely. Linda's a bank teller, or she's a bank teller who's active in the feminist movement. Most chose the second one, the feminist bank teller. That's wrong. Every feminist bank teller is still a bank teller, so the plain option includes more people. Adding feminist shrinks the group, but System 1 likes it better because it matches Linda's vibe. The chapter calls this the conjunction fallacy, thinking a combo is more likely than one part alone. Another case is a health survey. People got a scenario about a disease killing 128 folks out of 10,000. They picked between two stories. One said 64 died of heart issues, or 64 died of heart issues during exercise. They went with the exercise version, even though it's a smaller slice. The extra detail made it click, though it's less probable. System 1 grabs the vivid piece and runs. The chapter says this isn't just random. When details fit a stereotype or scene, like Linda fighting for causes, they feel truer. Studies show even smart folks slip here unless they're forced to slow down. System 2 could spot the error by checking basic rules like more specific means less likely, but it usually sleeps. The end ties this to everyday picks like judging people or risks, where a snappy tale beats plain facts. Chapter 16. Causes trump statistics. This chapter explains how System 1 picks stories over numbers when figuring things out. It leans on cause and effect tales that feel clear, even if stats say something else. The chapter says people trust what they can picture, like one event leading to another, more than dry data. This makes sense for quick calls, but trips up when the real odds matter. One example is about a cab crash. In a town, 85% of cabs are green and 15% are blue. A witness says a blue cab caused a hit and run, but they're only 80% sure of the color. People guess the cab's blue because the story links the crash to a blue cab. Math shows it's more likely green. 85% base rate beats the witness, but System 1 sticks to the tale. The chapter calls this ignoring base rates, where the big picture gets lost. Another case is a study about kidney cancer. Small towns had the highest rates and people thought something there, like water or air, caused it. But small places also had the lowest rates. It's just chance. Fewer people mean wilder swings. System 1 jumps on a cause, not the stats showing it's random. The same goes for a kid doing well after a special class. Parents credit the class, not luck or other factors, because the link feels real. The point is that System 1 loves a straight line from A to B. If a plane crashes after a storm, the storm's the villain, even if most flights in storms are fine. The chapter says System 2 could weigh the numbers, but it often nods at the story instead. The end notes this shapes beliefs, like blaming a diet for health or a coach for a win, when data might say it's not so simple. Chapter 17. Regression to the mean. This chapter looks at how things tend to even out over time, but people don't see it that way. System 1 expects extremes, like a great day or a bad one, to keep going, not fade back to normal. The chapter says this is regression to the mean. Wild results drift toward average because luck or random stuff plays a big role. People miss this and invent reasons instead. One example is about pilots. A teacher yells at a rookie after a rough landing and the next one's better. He praises a smooth landing and the next one's worse. He thinks yelling works and praise doesn't. Really, it's regression. Bad flights improve. Good ones dip, just by chance. System 1 links the shout to progress, not the odds. The same goes for a kid acing a test, then flunking. People blame effort, not natural swings. The chapter ties this to sports. A player has a hot streak, then cools off. Fans say he's choking, but it's just scores settling back. Studies show this with height too. Tall parents have kids shorter than them on average, and short parents have taller kids. It's not magic. Extremes balance out. System 1 doesn't get this. It wants a story, like genes failing or a coach fixing things. Another point is how this fools experts. A stock picker nails a year, then flops. People call it skill then luck, but it's often regression, random highs and lows. The chapter says System 2 could spot the pattern with data, but System 1 grabs causes instead. The end notes this trips up predictions. People bet on streaks continuing when they're due to fade. Chapter 18. Taming intuitive predictions. This chapter explains how people make guesses about the future and why they're often off. System 1 predicts by stretching what it sees now, like a good moment or a bad one, without adjusting for reality. The chapter says these gut calls feel right, but ignore how things level out or shift. It's possible to fix them, but it takes effort. System 1 skips. One example is a student, Julie, who read early as a kid. People guess her college grades based on that. System 1 says she'll be a star because she started strong. But reading at 4 doesn't lock in top marks. Other stuff like study habits or luck matters too. The chapter says, this is intuitive predicting, taking a clue and running too far. Regression to the mean, where extremes fade, gets missed. Another case is a business. A shop does great its first year, so folks predict huge growth. System 1 sees profit and imagines more, not competition or slowdowns. Studies show people overestimate like this with everything. Rain after a wet day, wins after a streak. They don't tweak for averages or outside factors. The chapter suggests a fix. Start with the base rate, like typical student grades or shop success, then adjust lightly from there. The point is that System 1 loves bold, simple forecasts. If a team wins big, it's unstoppable, not due for a dip. System 2 can tame this by checking stats and odds, but it's lazy. The chapter says pros, like stock analysts, fall for it too, chasing hot tips over steady trends. The end notes that better guesses need discipline, not just hunches. Chapter 19. The Illusion of Understanding. This chapter looks at how people think they get why things happen, even when they don't. System 1 builds neat stories about the past that make it seem clear and predictable. The chapter says this is an illusion. Real life is messier, with luck and hidden factors, but the mind smooths it over. People feel confident in these tales, though they're often wrong. One example is about success. A book like How to Win Big says a company thrived because of bold moves or a smart boss. System 1 loves this. It ties wins to clear causes. But lots of firms try bold stuff and fail. Luck picks the winners. The chapter says hindsight makes it look obvious after, not before. Studies show people rewrite their own past too. If a team wins, fans say they knew it, even if they didn't. Another case is history. Wars or crashes get explained as bound to happen once they're done. System 1 grabs a few big events, like a leader's choice, and ignores the chaos underneath. The chapter calls this the narrative fallacy, stitching facts into a clean line. It's why people think they'd spot a market drop coming, though no one does. Real causes are tangled, not simple. The point is that System 1 hates uncertainty. It fills gaps with meaning, even if it's fake. System 2 could question this, but it likes the story too. The chapter says this boosts overconfidence. People trust their grasp of why things went down, then bet big on shaky guesses. The end notes. It's hard to shake this illusion. The mind craves order too much. Chapter 20. The illusion of validity. This chapter explores how people trust their judgments even when they're shaky. System 1 sticks to its calls, like picking a winner or sizing up a person because they feel solid, not because they hold up. The chapter says this confidence comes from consistency, not truth. If a guess matches a pattern or story, it seems valid, even if the facts say otherwise. One example is about hiring. Managers meet a candidate who's sharp and charming. They rate him high and feel sure he'll shine. System 1 locks in because the traits fit a good worker image. Studies show these gut picks often flop. Interviews don't predict job success well, but the feeling sticks. The chapter says this illusion grows when clues line up, even if they're weak. Another case is stock trading. A trader spots a trend, say 3 up days, and bets big. It feels right because it's clear, and past wins back it up. But markets are noisy, and short streaks don't mean much. The chapter points to research where experts' picks barely beat random guesses, yet they stay sure. System 1 trusts the hunch over the odds. The point is that validity isn't real here, it's a trick of the mind. System 2 could test it with data, like checking how often these calls pan out, but it rarely does. The chapter says pros lean on experience, which feels strong but can mislead. The end notes this faith in flimsy judgment shapes big moves like investments or hires despite the cracks. All right, I'll summarize 2 chapters at once. Chapters 21 and 22, keeping it in simple, slightly formal language with plain paragraphs, using my own wording, and writing numbers fully in words, like a 21 instead of 21. I'll check after these 2 if you want me to continue. Here's the summary for chapters 21 and 22 of Thinking Fast and Slow. Chapter 21. Intuition versus formulas. This chapter compares gut feelings to strict rules for making decisions. System 1 leans on intuition, like a doctor's hunch or a scout's eye, but the chapter says formulas often beat that. Rules stick to data and patterns, while intuition grabs what feels right. People trust their instincts because they're personal, but studies show they're less steady. One example is medical guesses. Doctors judge a patient's risk, like for heart trouble, based on years of work. They feel confident sizing up symptoms fast, but a checklist with age, weight, and blood pressure predicts better. The chapter says this holds across fields. Wine experts pick vintages by taste, yet math using soil and rain does finer. System 1 trusts the human touch even when it's off. Another case is picking students. Admissions folks weigh interviews and essays, feeling they know a fit. Data shows grades and test scores alone outguess them. The chapter points to a study where simple point systems topped experts in jobs, loans, even parole calls. Intuition falters because it's swayed by mood or stray clues like a firm handshake, while formulas stay cold. The point is that System 2 could lean on stats, but people resist. Rules feel stiff, and pros swear by their knack. The chapter says the illusion of skill keeps intuition alive, though it's weaker. The end suggests mixing both. Start with data, tweak with sense, but warns gut calls need taming. Chapter 22. Expert intuition. When can we trust it? This chapter asks when expert hunches actually work. System 1 can shine for pros, but only under tight conditions. The chapter says intuition isn't magic. It grows from real practice in steady, clear setups. When the world's random or feedback's slow, it flops. One example is firefighters. A chief senses a floor's about to collapse and pulls his team out fast. He's right. Years of fires taught him subtle cues like heat or sound. The chapter says this is legit intuition. Lots of reps in a field where danger signals are sharp. Chess players do it too. After thousands of games, they spot winning moves instantly. System 1 learns the game's rules deep down, but it fails elsewhere. Stock traders guess markets daily, yet their feel rarely beats chance. The chapter says markets shift too wild, and wins don't teach clear lessons. Luck hides flaws. Same with political pundits picking elections. Feedback's murky, so intuition stays shaky. Studies show pros in messy fields overrate their gut, clinging to confidence. The point is that trust needs proof, regular practice plus quick, solid results. System 2 could check if the setup fits, but it often skips. The chapter says true skill looks quiet, not flashy, and grows slow. The end warns against blind faith in experts. Test their track record first. Chapter 23. The Outside View. This chapter looks at how people predict things, like how long a task takes, by focusing on their own case. System 1 dives into details, like planning a trip or building a house, and guesses based on that alone. The chapter says this inside view misses the bigger picture. Looking at how similar stuff turns out, called the outside view, works better, but feels less natural. One example is a project. A team writing a book thinks it'll take 2 years. They map chapters and deadlines. System 1 likes this story. Effort plus time equals done. But most books like it take 7 years, and many flop. The outside view, checking averages, shows they're too hopeful. People skip this because their plan feels special, not typical. Studies show this with bridges, software, even vacations. Folks underestimate delays every time. Another case is personal goals. Someone diets thinking, I'll lose 10 pounds in a month because they're motivated. System 1 buys the intent, not the stats. Most dieters stall or quit. The chapter says the outside view tempers this. Look at others, not just will. It's why firms miss budgets. Managers trust their fix, not past overruns. The point is that System 2 could pull back and compare, but System 1 sticks to the script. The chapter calls this planning fallacy, overconfidence in control. The end suggests starting with base rates, like how long most projects take, then tweaking. It's less fun, but truer. Chapter 24. The Engine of Capitalism. This chapter ties quick thinking to business risks. System 1 fuels optimism, pushing people to bet big on ideas like starting a firm or chasing a deal. The chapter says this drive powers growth but blinds folks to failure odds. Entrepreneurs see wins, not flops, and that keeps the system humming. One example is startups. A guy opens a shop picturing crowds and cash. System 1 paints a sunny tale. Hard work pays off. Stats say most new places shut in 5 years, but he feels exempt. The chapter says this bias, overrating success, sparks action. If everyone saw the 50-50 shot, fewer would try. Experiments show people rate their own odds high, even with grim data. Another case is inventions. A team pitches a gadget, sure it'll sell. They focus on its edge, not how 9 out of 10 products tank. System 1 skips the outside view, market history, and rides hope. The chapter says this isn't dumb, it's human. Optimism beats caution for progress, even if it costs. The point is that System 2 could crunch failure rates, but System 1's cheer wins. The chapter calls this the engine. Bold moves, fueled by shaky faith, build economies. The end notes, it's double-edged. Wealth grows, but busts pile up too. Chapter 25, Bernoulli's Errors. This chapter digs into how people weigh money and risks, starting with an old idea from a thinker named Bernoulli. He said folks care about wealth changes, not totals. Losing $10 stings more for a poor person than a rich one. The chapter says this makes sense but misses how System 1 really works. It doesn't judge cash by math, it twists it through feelings and frames. One example is a coin toss. Bet $10 to win $20 or lose $10. Bernoulli's rule says take it, since the gain outweighs the loss. But people balk. System 1 hates losing more than it loves winning, even if the odds favor them. Studies show this gap. $10 lost feels twice as bad as $10 gained. The chapter calls this loss aversion. Pain trumps joy. Another case is choices. Pick between keeping $10 sure or flipping for $20 or $0. Most stick with the sure thing. System 1 clings to what's safe. Bernoulli thought people balance utility, like how much $10 helps, but the chapter says they don't. They feel the hit or miss, not the logic. It's why folks dodge risks that look smart on paper. The point is that System 1 skips calm math for gut reactions. System 2 could run the numbers, but emotions lead. The chapter says Bernoulli saw part of it, wealth matters, but missed the human quirks. The end notes this shapes bets, deals, and even life picks, all off-kilter from pure reason. Chapter 26. Prospect Theory. This chapter builds a new way to see choices, called prospect theory, fixing Bernoulli's gaps. System 1 doesn't weigh total wealth. It judges gains and losses from where people stand now. The chapter says this shift, plus loss aversion and shaky risk views, drives decisions. It's less about logic, more about how options feel. One example is a gamble. Get $100 sure, or flip for $250 or nothing. Most take the $100. System 1 likes the lock. Now flip it. Lose $100 sure, or flip for $0 or $250 loss. Most gamble. System 1 dodges the certain hit. The chapter says this flips with framing. Gains feel safe. Losses push risks. Another case is value. $5 means more going from $0 to $5 than from $100 to $105. The chapter calls this diminishing returns. Each extra dollar shrinks in thrill. Losses work the same. Dropping from $100 to $50 hurts more than $50 to $0. System 1 feels the steep start, not the flat end. The point is that prospect theory fits real choices better. People don't average wealth. They react to changes, hate losses, and twist odds. System 2 could straighten it, but System 1 rules. The end says, this explains why folks buy insurance or chase long shots. Feelings, not facts, steer. Chapter 27. The Endowment Effect. This chapter looks at how people value stuff more once they own it. System 1 bumps up worth just because something's mine, not from logic, but from attachment. The chapter says this ties to loss aversion. Giving up feels worse than not getting in the first place. It shapes trades, deals, and even small choices. One example is mugs. People got a mug and were asked how much they'd sell it for. Most said $5 or more. Others without mugs offered $2 to buy one. Ownership doubled the price. System 1 clings to what's held. Studies show this with tickets too. Folks won't sell a rare seat for less than they'd pay to grab it. Losing it stings extra. Another case is trading. Someone with a pen won't swap for a candy bar even if they like candy as much. The chapter says System 1 sees loss, not gain. Letting go trumps adding on. It's not about real value, it's about the shift. Markets dodge this with cash, but personal stuff sticks harder. The point is that ownership warps judgment. System 2 could weigh fair worth, but System 1 guards what's close. The chapter says this slows trades, people hoard, and boosts regret when they let go. The end notes it's deep in us, even kids fight to keep toys they've touched. Chapter 28, Bad Events. This chapter explores how System 1 overreacts to losses and threats. Bad stuff, like pain or failure, hits harder than good stuff lifts. The chapter says this comes from loss aversion, and how the mind flags negatives fast. It's wired to dodge harm, so downsides loom large. One example is money. Losing $50 feels worse than winning $50 feels good. About twice as bad, studies say. System 1 dwells on the drop, not the rise. It's the same with words. A harsh, lazy, stings more than smart cheers. The chapter ties this to survival. Spotting danger beats chasing treats. Another case is goals. Golfers try harder to avoid a bogey than to land a birdie. One's a loss, one's a gain. Experiments show people work more to keep $10 than to earn $10 extra. System 1 pushes against threats, not toward perks. It's why bad news spreads. Fear grabs attention. The point is that negatives rule decisions. System 2 might balance it, but System 1 fixates on what's wrong. The chapter says this skews life. Relationships sour faster from fights than they grow from kindness. The end notes, it's not fair, but it's how the mind rolls. Chapter 29. The fourfold pattern. This chapter lays out how people handle risks and gains in 4 big ways. System 1 shifts based on size and chance, small odds or sure things, wins or losses. The chapter says, this pattern explains why folks gamble on long shots or cling to safe bets. It's not steady logic, it's feelings flipping with the stakes. One example is tiny chances. For a 1% shot at $100, people pay more than $1. System 1 loves the dream of winning big. Flip it. A 1% risk of losing $100 makes them pay to dodge it. Low odds spark bold moves both ways, hope or fear. But with 99% odds, it's different. $99 sure beats a shot at $100. System 1 locks in the win. Same for loss. They'll risk losing $100 over paying $99 sure. Another case is big stakes. A sure $10,000 trumps a 90% shot at $12,000. System 1 hates big risks when winnings close. But losing $10,000 sure, they'll gamble on a 90% loss of $12,000 to dodge it. High stakes flip the game, safety for gains, chance against pain. The point is that System 1 bends with context. Certainty matters more near sure things, wild bets fit slim odds. System 2 could crunch expected value, but feelings rule. The chapter says, this 4-way split, high-low odds, gain-loss, drives lotteries, insurance, and deals. The end ties it to human quirks, chasing highs, fleeing lows. Chapter 30. Rare events. This chapter digs into how System 1 overplays rare stuff, like disasters or jackpots. Things that hardly happen get big weight if they're vivid or talked up. The chapter says this comes from availability and emotion, not real odds. People fixate on the loud, not the likely. One example is earthquakes. They're rare, but news blasts shake-ups with wrecked homes, so folks rate them riskier than flu, which kills more quietly. System 1 grabs the image, crumbling walls over stats. Studies show this with lotteries too. A winner's grin on TV makes the 1-in-a-million shot feel close. Rarity fades. The story sticks. Another case is decisions. After a plane crash, people drive instead, though roads kill more. System 1 flags the fiery wreck, not car wrecks' slow toll. The chapter says media feeds this. Floods or sharks jump out, while heart disease sleeps. Even pros overreact. A doctor might test for a weird illness after one case, skipping common colds. The point is that rare stuff distorts judgment. System 2 could check frequencies, but System 1 rides the hype. The chapter says this pumps fear or hope, buying tickets or fleeing cities, way past reason. The end notes it's hard to ignore. Vivid trumps math every time. Chapter 31. Risk policies. This chapter looks at how people handle risks when they pile up, not just one by one. System 1 judges each choice alone, like a single bet, but misses the big picture. The chapter says this leads to dumb moves, like dodging small losses while risking huge ones. A better way is setting rules to see the whole game. One example is insurance. Someone buys a $10 policy for a phone, but skips a $100 one for a car repair. System 1 hates the sure loss each time. $10 stings, $100 worse. But over years, phones break less than cars, so the car policy saves more. Looking at all risks together, total cost, not single hits, flips the call. Studies show people don't do this naturally. They flinch at each price tag. Another case is gambling. A guy turns down a 50-50 shot to win $20 or lose $10. It feels risky. Later, he takes a bigger bet, 80% chance to lose $100. System 1 sees each alone, first cautious, then desperate, not the net loss piling up. The chapter says a policy, like only bet if odds beat 50%, cuts the mess. The point is that System 1 chops life into bits, missing how choices add up. System 2 could plan long-term, but it's lazy. The chapter suggests broad rules like cap losses at 5% to tame risks. The end notes this helps with money, health, even time. Steady beats, scattered every time. Chapter 32, Keeping Score. This chapter explores how System 1 tracks gains and losses like a mental ledger. It doesn't just feel them, it tallies wins and pains, tweaking how people act. The chapter says this scoreboard shapes choices, often pushing folks to avoid regret or chase even. Loss aversion and framing play big here. One example is selling. A guy buys a stock for $50 and it drops to $40. He holds, selling locks in a $10 loss, and System 1 hates that mark. If it hits $60, he sells fast to book a $10 win. The chapter says people care more about the tally, plus $10 or minus $10, than the stock's future. Studies show this stalls trades. Folks cling to losers, dump winners. Another case is sunk costs. Someone pays $20 for a show but gets sick. They go anyway. System 1 wants that $20 to count, not vanish. The chapter calls this mental accounting. Past costs twist now. It's why people finish bad meals or stick with dud projects. Quitting feels like a loss on the books. The point is that System 1 runs a quirky count, not a clean slate. System 2 could ignore old tabs and focus ahead, but feelings stick. The chapter says this fuels regret, selling too soon, holding too long, all from watching the score. The end ties it to daily life. People juggle these ledgers without seeing the trap. Chapter 33, Reversals. This chapter looks at how choices flip when people see options side by side versus alone. System 1 picks steady when judging one thing, called single evaluation, but wobbles when comparing two, joint evaluation. The chapter says, this reversal comes from what stands out, not fixed values. Context bends the mind's take. One example is a job. Pick between two. One pays $40,000 with nice co-workers, another $50,000 with dull ones. Most take the $50,000. System 1 grabs cash when they're compared. But asked alone, is $40,000 enough with great people? More say yes, focus shifts to comfort. Studies show this with gadgets too. A pricey camera beats a cheap one head-to-head, but alone the cheap one's fine. Another case is fairness. People rate a settlement, say $10,000 for a small injury, as stingy by itself. Pair it with a $5,000 offer, and $10,000 looks fair. System 1 weighs what's next to it, not some absolute rule. The chapter says this happens because joint mode highlights easy traits, like dollars, while single mode digs deeper. The point is that System 1 isn't firm. How options line up sways it. System 2 could lock in standards, but it bends too. The chapter says this flips laws, deals, even morals. Judgments shift with the frame. The end notes it's tricky. Same person, same facts, different calls. Chapter 34, Frames and Reality. This chapter digs into how words twist choices even if the facts stay put. System 1 reacts to how things are said, called framing, not just what's true. The The chapter says this isn't about confusion, it's feelings steering the ship. Losses hit harder than gains, so phrasing picks the winner. One example is a surgery. Told it has a 90% survival rate, most agree. System 1 sees life. Told it has a 10% death rate, many refuse. Same odds, but death looms. Studies show this with cash too. Keep $20, beats lose $80 from $100, though it's identical. The chapter says loss framing spooks people off. Another case is gas. A discount for cash sounds better than a surcharge for cards. Same gap, different spin. System 1 cheers gains, ducks losses. The chapter ties this to mental accounting. Gain feels like a win, loss like a hit. Even pros, like doctors or sellers, lean on the frame they hear. The point is that reality doesn't rule, words do. System 2 could strip it to numbers, but System 1 rides the vibe. The chapter says this sways votes, health picks, and sales. Frames aren't neutral. The end warns it's baked in. People feel, not think, the setup. Chapter 35. Two selves. This chapter splits how people feel into two parts: the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self lives moment to moment, pain, joy, all as it happens. The remembering self looks back, judging the past by peaks and ends, not the whole ride. The chapter says, System 1 leans on memory's tale, not what was felt live, and that twists choices. One example is a cold test. People dipped hands in icy water, some for 60 seconds, others for 90 seconds with a warm-up at the end. Asked which they'd repeat, most picked the 90-second one. The experiencing self suffered longer, but the remembering self liked the softer finish. System 1 skips total pain for the last note. Studies show this with colonoscopies too. A shorter, sharp one feels worse in memory than a longer, gentler one. Another case is vacations. A great trip with a bad end, like lost luggage, gets sour in the mind. The experiencing self loved days of fun, but the remembering self tags it rotten. The chapter says this peak end rule rules recall. Highs, lows, and closes matter more than time. People plan by memory, not live feel. The point is that System 1 picks the story, not the sum. System 2 could tally real minutes, but it trusts the recap. The chapter says this gaps life, what's lived versus what's kept, shaping health calls or fun. The end notes it's odd, memory's boss even if it fibs. Chapter 36. Life as a story. This chapter ties the two selves to how people see their whole lives. System 1 builds a tale from big moments and endings, peaks of joy or pain, not a day-by-day count. The chapter says, this makes happiness tricky. The experiencing self tracks now, the remembering self grades the plot, and they don't match. One example is pain. A patient suffers months, but ends with hope. Memory calls it bearable. Another fights less, but ends grim. Memory hates it. The experiencing self felt each stab, but the remembering self scores the arc. System 1 picks drama over grind. Studies show people rate past years by highlights, like a promotion, not average days. Another case is goals. Someone chases a degree, slogging years. The experiencing self hates late nights, but if they graduate, the remembering self cheers the win. Drop out, and it's all waste. The chapter says this story lens twists worth. Time's ignored for the punchline. People judge others this way too. A sad end sinks a good life. The point is that System 1 craves meaning, not totals. System 2 could average it out, but memory's king. The chapter says this drives big moves, like jobs or moves, based on how they'll look later. The end wonders. Which self counts more, the one living or the one recalling? Chapter 37. Experienced well-being. This chapter focuses on measuring real-time happiness, the experiencing self's world. System 1 tracks feelings moment to moment, like comfort or stress, not memory's highlights. The chapter says this is tough to pin down. Life's a stream, not a snapshot. but it's closer to what people live. Tools like daily logs or mood checks try to catch it. One example is time use. People rated tasks, work, play, chores, from 0 to 6 on joy. Commuting sank low, around 2, while friends hit 5. The experiencing self cares about now. Traffic drags, laughs lift. The chapter says this varies. A mom's day with kids might score high, but a sick day tanks. Studies show income helps. More cash cuts worry, but only to a point, like $75,000 a year. Another case is health. Chronic pain drags daily scores, say 3 versus 5 for the healthy. The experiencing self feels each ache, not the tale of "I coped." The chapter says this shifts with focus too. A good chat distracts from a limp. Data tracks this. People log moods live, not after. So it's raw, not polished. The point is that System 1 lives these ups and downs, not the remembering self spin. System 2 could average it, but the feel's what counts here. The chapter says this gauges true well-being, hours of ease or grind, over storybook ends. The end asks, why not chase this more? Chapter 38. Thinking about life. This chapter pulls it all together, how the two selves judge life. The remembering self scores by big wins or flops like a degree or a breakup, while the experiencing self sums daily vibes. The chapter says System 1 splits them. Memory picks pride, experience picks peace, and people weigh both without seeing the gap. One example is surveys. Asked, how good's life? Folks lean on the remembering self, say 4 out of 10 if they've hit goals. Asked, how happy yesterday? The experiencing self says 3 if it was dull. The chapter says this misaligns. A great career might mask drab days. Studies show richer folks rate life high, 5, but their mood logs barely budge past middle income. Another case is regret. A lost chance, like skipping school, haunts the remembering self, dropping life to 2. But if days stayed fine, say 4, the experiencing self shrugs. The chapter says memory's loud. A bad end, like divorce, tanks the past, even if years were solid. People rethink life through this lens, not the grind's tally. The point is that System 1 juggles 2 truths, plot versus feel, and they clash. System 2 could bridge them, but folks don't. The chapter says this shapes what matters. Some chase peaks, others ease. The end wonders, can we pick or do both rule us? Conclusion. This part wraps up how the 2 thinking systems shape life. System 1 runs fast, grabbing quick answers from habits, feelings, and shortcuts. It's handy, dodging a car or smiling at a friend, but sloppy, missing odds or facts. System 2 moves slow, checking details and logic, like solving a puzzle or planning a budget. It's sharper but lazy, letting System 1 lead too often. The book says this mix makes people human, clever yet flawed, fast yet blind. One big lesson is judgment. System 1 twists risks, like fearing rare crashes over daily ills, because vivid stuff sticks. It overrates wins like a lucky streak and clings to losses like a sunk $20. System 2 could fix this with stats, but it naps unless pushed. The chapter says this hits everywhere, jobs, bets, even laws. People trust gut calls that feel true, not what holds up. Another takeaway is happiness. The experiencing self lives each hour, 3 for a dull day, 5 for fun. The remembering self grades the tale, 4 if it ends well, 2 if it flops. The book says they don't align. A great life might feel grim daily. System 1 picks memories spin too much, so folks chase peaks over peace. It's why a bad week sours a good year. The point is awareness. Knowing System 1's tricks, like jumping to stories or dodging loss, lets System 2 nudge better. The book doesn't say it's easy. Habits die hard. It ends pushing gentle fixes, tweak words, check base rates, weigh real odds. People won't master it, but they can lean wiser, less fool, more clear. Thanks for following this summary. If you like digging into thinking fast and slow with me, consider subscribing for more breakdowns like this. I can tackle other books, topics, or whatever you're curious about. Just say the word. Let's keep exploring how the mind ticks.